Like we have a whole big set of problems on our hands that requires nothing more than the full wholesale reevaluation of our education system in the United States.
I think the stat was like it went from 1 in 8 that needed remedial, or 1 in 100 that needed remedial math to 1 in 8, something like that, over a 3-year period, which is crazy. That means we have massive knowledge gaps in the kids in the educational system now, like going through K through 12, plus now entering the university system. This is a massive opportunity for EdTech in the sense of like bridging knowledge gaps.
Our level of education, the general level of education for the average US citizen, is far below what we see here with these university students who are struggling and below standard. Pull back. Look at how many adults, how many US citizens today can't read or write above a 6th grade level. This is a much, much bigger problem than the kids who need help in math going into university. We need to build systems and technologies that require the use of AI in school so that students are leveraging AI as a tool, like they might use a calculator, like they might use a laptop, like they might use any other tool in school. It should be a required thing that they use AI to do their schoolwork. And we can build AI in a way that it reinforces those outcomes that we need in the workforce, in the workplace.
If you hold a C-level executive position in a large institution and you have to wait for your competitors to make the call in adopting what is obviously the biggest technological revolution since the internet, should you hold that position in your company?
That's a hard question to answer without being a bit condescending and pissing some people off. I'm never shied away from that. You guys know me. So let's piss some people off.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Code and Connor podcast. My name is Connor Deeks, CEO of CodeStrap, and I'm joined, as always, with the original CodeStrap himself and CTO, Dorian Smiley. We're going to be bringing you guys the latest and greatest around Palantir, the tech, the company, the community. We'll also be discussing insights on other companies, things happening in the world of AI, of data, of consulting, of investing, of education, and any meaningful topic that requires attention. The focus of today's episode is AI in education. We're joined today by Bill Salak. Bill is the CTO and COO of Brainly, the technology company that provides an AI learning companion that goes where students go. At Brainly, he's helped scale one of the world's largest AI-powered learning platforms, serving 15 million learners daily. Prior to Brainly, Bill racked up 2 decades of leadership, driving transformative technology at Age of Learning, AOL, HBO, ETS, Hasbro, NBC-Universal, and even the U.S. Army. Bill, welcome to Code and Connor.
Hey, Connor. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, first topic on the docket is the state of AI and AI limitations. Bill, we see you on other podcasts and providing your insights. I'd love to open the floor with what you think about the state of AI.
Yeah, so a bit of a loaded question. I'm coming from the perspective of everything that we have isn't being taken for granted. It's kind of like you get used to flying in a metal tube across the country or across huge oceans, and you don't realize the miracle that is an airplane. You kind of take it for granted. That's kind of where I'm coming from with the state of AI. I feel like what we have right now is pretty amazing, extremely capable. I constantly complain about it every day that it's not good enough, but that's the moment of taking it for granted. So I think we're much further than I had ever hoped we could be 10 years ago. I appreciate that. I think there's a long way to go. The path won't be a straight line. I think we've got a little bit of some misdirection. But the general thing that I try to remind people of on a daily basis is the AI that we have is extremely capable if you use it the right way. And a lot of the failings come from either a misapplication or a misuse of what we have right now. So you got to work around, with any technology, you have to work around the limitations and try to lean into what it does best.
So you're not in the doomer club, I take it.
I mean, if if you want to have like a philosophical conversation about will this destroy humanity, I could definitely offer some interesting opinions there.
I think we're a long way away from humanity destroying AI that's going to threaten humanity, but there does seem to be like a lot of hype around it, and maybe it was more like the AGI hype was more 6 months ago. It felt like, or maybe a year ago. It seems like now everyone's kind of settling in. I think really around what you're saying, which is like the technology we have is good enough to solve immense challenges and create a ton of value. It does lead me to wonder, like, what does the future AI system sort of look like? I don't know if we know what the real shape of a lot of these, specifically if we look at EdTech. What does the shape of that system kind of look like, and what does it do? What are the features? How do humans and AI kind of interact and work together to solve problems? Is also an interesting aspect of it. We kind of been heavily looking into that here. Is like, how do we get AI systems to improve the human? But I'd be interested to get your take on, like, what are you building for? Like, what do your AI systems kind of look like? How are you thinking about these problems, like how AI and humans interact and make each other better? And like, what are your thoughts on that part of it?
So there's a lot there, but let me start with just sort of a basic premise, to like contextualize it for anybody who might disagree with what I'm going to say, because I think this is where a lot of the arguments happen, or a lot of like the head shaking happens. Like I'm a firm believer that AI will do whatever work or task it can do in the future. So and that's kind of a dumb statement, but really what's loaded into that is to say, like, the market will apply AI where humans used to do work, and anything that AI can do to replace humans, it will do. Like the market will just value that it has this cheaper, more consistent, never tiring, never talking back worker, and it will put AI in those on those tasks, on those jobs. It'll use AI to replace humans in the workforce. I think that's inevitable. Now, like, this is where people generally start disagreeing with me, but I haven't defined a timeline. I just said in the future, right? So if you think that's 50 years out, or 150 years out, or 5 years out, like, we can disagree about that. But I think that if you disagree with the idea that it will eventually happen, you're not really paying attention to the trend. And eventually humans will have very different role in the workplace and in society in general, right? So as AI becomes more capable and it can do more things, there's less things for humans to do, or at least what humans are doing is changing. And so there's, we can have like huge debates and philosophical conversations about, like, should AI ever have the ability or be put in a position to be able to judge whether or not a human should be charged with or should be guilty of a crime, right? So, like, would we ever put it in the role of a judge over a human to say, like, you're guilty? Would we put it in a role to, um, as a politician or a decision maker or a leader in government or military? Like, there's all these sort of cases where I think, we're not comfortable with that. And so we can say, well, that's a role that a human will have at least for the foreseeable future, and maybe, beyond that, we would never replace that with a robot or AI. But like the small stuff, right? The stuff that like I was doing 20 years ago that is now fully automated, and like the stuff that I'm doing now that can be fully automated will be automated and taken by AI. So, like, that's the future that I'm building for, and that's the future that I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about what is the role of a human in the future workforce, and how do we educate the students of today to be prepared for that? And the thing that we have to confront is that education needs to fundamentally change to be able to get people ready, students ready for that workplace. We can't have a debate, or we can't continue to be stuck on the point of whether or not AI should be part of our education system. It should be a requirement that students are using AI to do their schoolwork, to learn the things that they're learning in school, because those skills are the fundamental skills of the very near workforce, like learning how, not knowing the hard science or not knowing all of the details, but being able to work with AI who does know all of the hard science and all of those details far more than a human being can keep in their head at any given time. Like working with that AI is going to be a fundamental skill. Like it's going to be as core as reading, writing, and math. Like it should be something that's just part of core curriculum, and it should be now, which is the scary part, because I don't think that a student who graduates in 5 years from now can afford to not have that skill.
Well, I completely agree. A lot of the task load, particularly of entry level workers in modern enterprises, are doing a lot of tasks that didn't require the educational background or the intellect that they gathered through their educational journey. They end up moving data between different places. Now, that can be unstructured data in email format or structured data, but it doesn't require a huge amount of intellect to do those things. And if you can educate a workforce to utilize AI and then come into a workforce, they actually become a disruptive force because they're going to be able to do stuff much quicker at a much cheaper rate than the existing workforce. I do think that if we can get more people learning, even that are experienced professionals, in addition to students coming into the workforce, that we can more quickly get to what you just said, Bill, which is that AI is going to do all the things that it is capable of doing. And when we take this massive amount of workload that most professionals have to deal with, that is not intellectually rigorous, that is mostly just moving around data from point A to point B, that we can get much higher output from a shift that can happen much quicker. And I think ultimately that's going to lead to professions that are much more human, much more intellectual in nature, that aren't so burdened by busy work. And I don't really see anyone other than maybe the people that we've talked about before, Dorian, that love their spreadsheets more than their wives, that are going to push back on that future state. It's much more interesting. I don't know anyone that loves coming into work and typing in forms. The question, like, just like you mentioned, like, how do we get education to be part of this, and how do we realize that journey a bit faster than the current pace?
Yeah, and I think it's like an interesting shift, right? Because it's a shift from um being the source of knowledge or knowing where to get that knowledge, right? Which is, like, I'm sure you guys have seen it. I've seen it throughout my career. You've got tribal knowledge embedded in humans. And even if that stuff's documented, it's like there's a few people who know where it's at and know how to access it and know how to leverage it. So even with the best intentions and some pretty clean practices around documentation, it's still human centric. Knowledge is still human centric in many organizations today. Now, the shift here is that we can codify the knowledge like we're doing today, and we can have AI act as that um, facility by which we expose and interpret that information. So it becomes more about human judgment and application of knowledge and less about knowledge recall, knowledge sourcing. And that's a really interesting shift for the workplace. And it's not a skill that we teach. So most people who are good at this learn it on the job, even today, or like, even 5 years ago, 10 years ago. It's not like we teach people how to be savvy thinkers or to apply um, certain rigorous thought practices to solving problems, right? Like as engineers, we learn to solve problems, but they're not teaching us how to think. You have to learn how to think writing code to be successful. And a lot of job functions are like that. You have to learn how to think in that job to be successful at it if you're no longer the knowledge sourcer and the guardian of the facts who can go find the right thing when somebody asks, like, what do we do in this situation, and you know where to find the answer. That's gone. That problem's solved now. So it's a
Yeah,
shift, and it's a shift in skills. It's a shift in what we value in the workplace.
it's interesting because I think you're exactly right. You're always trying to look, at least in the education I went through, and what most people are trying to find is like the right answer from just data or knowledge recall. But if you can automate away essentially that part of it, you have to be thinking about like solving for unknowns, which is a totally different skill set because you're trying to you're trying to aggregate the facts, aggregate what's happening that AI is doing on your behalf, and then essentially predict, even if it's not far out in the future, like what the right answer could be, and being able to iterate on that versus, like you said, just trying to find information that's buried somewhere.
I noticed you didn't put a time horizon on this though, so I want to maybe unpack it a little bit. Do you think we get there with current technology? I guess like the current architectures we have and the trajectory we are on. To how far do you think we get in the tasks that can be automated? You know, or is there a progression, a new architecture, a new technology that we need in order to kind of fully realize this vision?
So that's the right question, and we have some signals, or we have some things that are happening in market that can help us like contextualize this into some broad categories. So like, to me, the things that can't be automated will be things that lack context, or inputs. And context and inputs sort of being the same thing in this sense. So the problems that still exist in the real world and that will require real world inputs and outputs will be very difficult to automate, right? This is why there's a huge investment in robots. Like, physical interaction with the real world that's built for humans will be a barrier to automation. Lots of people working on those problems, lots of money going into solving those problems. So automatically we have a boundary. Until we solve that problem well, there's a limit to what we can do in terms of interacting with the real world. But digital problems, I think we'll have solutions. We have a lot of solutions now, and I think that the main problem that we have in terms of rollout and adoption has to do with human-centric organizations and processes. So it's almost like a virtual boundary that we've created for ourselves. Like in the real world interaction, there's a real physical limit. But in an organization, you have a virtual limit that's just as real. And that's, how did we organize our company and how do we think things need to get done? It's no less of a barrier. It's very difficult to break down those ingrained things that are, they're just as difficult and hard to solve for. But there's going to be this wave of people looking to solve those problems, and market forces here are going to cause automation in the digital space and the breakdown of those barriers to happen quicker, right? They're still hard problems, but in the real world, we can't just suspend physics or say it doesn't matter anymore. Like, we're still physics constrained, right? In an organization, when those processes and structures don't allow the company to move fast enough, the small startup comes and eats their lunch. And I think we're going to have more and more small startups, small companies that are able to outmaneuver the larger companies because they're bound by those processes and those, ingrained cultures of human-centric organization. So the smaller companies will move in, they'll start eating the lunch of the bigger companies, and those bigger companies will either change or they'll die. And that I think is, much harder problem to solve. Like I said, with physics, you can't just suspend it and say, well,
Right. Well, I mean, the fundamental challenge in enterprise is like a lot of that knowledge is in Bob's head, or Alice's head, right? And so it's like you have to find a way to encode that to get it into the context as an input, right? And so to the extent your organization is dysfunctional and it's hard to like figure these things out and discover them, AI is probably going to amplify that, And so but to the extent you have a good organization and these things are discoverable and you can inject them into the context, AI will probably amplify that as well, right? And start to accelerate the growth trajectory.
Yeah, and you would think, I do a fair amount of consulting and advising companies on these particular types of problems. Like, we solve this really well at Brainly, and we've seen huge orders of magnitude increase in efficiency and performance because of the things we did. And it was process, organization, technology, and people. Those were the keystones to make this change. And you would hope, or you would expect that like you could go into a large company and install a program where Bob is solving that problem and codifying that knowledge and leveraging technology and AI to automate his role, and then elevate himself and to be able to take on more responsibility and more work. But there's like this it's not everywhere, but it's enough places where it's just like this malicious incompetence. It's like weaponized failure, right? Where it's like, okay, Bob, you have a chance. You can be the hero. You can help, replace yourself and move up and forward and show your colleagues how they can also leverage AI. Oh yeah, but AI doesn't work. It's broken. It's inconsistent. It's never going to replace me because, look at all these places that didn't work. Um, yeah, but we could just replace those things that you're doing, Bob, because those things that you're calling out as failures aren't really necessary. And in many cases, Bob knows that. And if he doesn't know that, um, it is that sort of weaponized incompetence causing larger failure of that rollout.
Yeah, I think there's so I mean we consult as well, obviously. We probably need to bring in some behavioral scientists into our organization, Dorian, to handle some of the emotional aspect of some of this stuff. But you're right. What people want to do is like get a very quick win with a piece of technology, or find some way to make an excuse that they don't have to leverage or implement technology solutions. But a majority of the problems facing these companies today are structural. It's the processes that they've designed purely maybe for historical technology or for historical reasons, that if you just kind of step, like, you don't have to go to 30,000 foot, you just step back a little bit and go, I don't think we need any of this process or any of these artifacts to actually get to the solution. So a majority of that transformation that companies can benefit from is mostly just subtraction of complexity. And then you can start to identify where like technology really would change how the outcome is delivered. And sometimes that comes with a little bit more risk or a little bit more failure. But then if you compare it, or at least on paper, but then you compare it to the human led process, how much it costs to try and get to a fully deterministic 100% right outcome, it costs far more than what the solution could deliver with maybe just a small error rate.
Well, the human process doesn't scale either, so you have this like scale problem. But like I think part of the challenge isn't just how do I make changes to my organization so it functions correctly. I think the big part of it is bringing all the right data together. So like in a lot of cases, organizations have used humans as the bridge between systems that are disconnected, so they just dump that context in their head. They know what to do as they navigate between systems because they have all this context floating around with them. Now we have this problem of like, but wait, how do we do that for AI, right? Like AI is going to need that same context as inputs. And so moving across systems becomes hard. And organizations, as well as I do, Connor, like the challenges around digital transformation in enterprise are largely that integration problem of pulling the data from all the silos, modeling it in a way that makes sense. Because in many cases, these are like the data tables are 200 columns in them and make zero sense, may not even be named correctly. So like so the technical challenge outside of the organizational one is pretty big for enterprise, I think. I think this also exists for universities and education institutions too. A lot of the information isn't encoded anywhere. It's in a physical thing, or it's, in the teacher's head. Andrew Karpathy wrote a little bit about this in this process of LLMification. Like, how would you teach a model physics such that it could then teach the human physics? And I think part of it is a textbook problem, but part of it is also like a professor or instructor problem. So I think in both educational context and enterprise context, you have this really massive problem around stitching data together and building some sort of ontology or something around a subject or a domain, such that now it can all be used as context for the AI. I'm going to be interested to know if you guys are thinking about this at Brainly. I know that you've done work with textbooks in the past and dealt with these challenges around homework help too that deal a lot with this, but I was interested to get your thoughts on the data side of this.
Yeah, I mean, not exactly in the way that you're describing it, but I mean, context is king, right? Context is everything when it comes to applying knowledge. And when you're working with LLMs, when you're working with AI, it's that and especially in a learning environment, education environment, it's the knowledge application that really is the hardest part of the problem to solve. So like an easy example, and I've talked about this in a lot of different interviews, but one of the things that I think shows the example of this is when I came to Brainly, we had this sort of mantra of like, every question has a perfect answer. Like if we could just improve the quality of the answer, we're improving the quality of our product. And the more answers, the more questions we cover, the more complete our product is. And there was a shift in thinking that I led after we did some research about like who is a Brainly user, what are they doing when they're getting homework help on Brainly and they're looking at these questions and explanations. Like the reality is there is no single best answer for any question, because the way my teacher's teaching it may be different than the way your teacher's teaching it. And even if we ask the same question, our teachers would give us different answers simply because the source materials are different. They're coming at it from a different angle. But then you layer in the curriculum, like the predicate concepts, the successor concepts, and now you have this whole chain of educational context in the curriculum that you have to include and consider in your answer. And then layer in where I've struggled with the previous material versus where you've struggled, and our answer deviates even further because I may need reinforcement in certain concepts that I'm not understanding well, that you do understand, and your problem or your need for help with this question is coming from a different place or a different learning gap. And lastly, like we're human, right? So the way that we communicate or the way that a teacher communicates to us is highly personalized and tailored to us. And this is something that we spend a lot of time understanding, and we've recently built into our own AI tutor. Is our tutor will learn how to communicate with the student it's talking to. So the tutor is learning about the student. It's learning the learning gaps. Like, what has the student struggled with? How are they being taught these concepts? And how does this student prefer to be communicated with so that we get the most engagement and the most effective outcomes? And these are all things that we've done research around and studied and picked apart for years now. And we call this personalization, but this is a lot of really deep concepts that come from the high level of just what is it to be a human and interact with another human being, down to like how do you traverse knowledge, um and and understand one learner's experience with that knowledge versus another's, right? Like, because we're not robots, we're not getting it the same way or getting the same mental models, even though we may read the same thing. Yeah, and then the U.S. school system doesn't make it any easier, right? Because we don't normalize anything. We don't have national curriculum. It is a patchwork quilt at best.
Well, the application there to enterprise and actually collecting data, trying to get to personalized capability, could not be more clear in my mind. Tracking data and let alone normalizing, even collecting the data on what people are doing on a day-to-day basis, such that you could get to something that's more personalized in nature to perform that job, is effectively non-existent today. So like if you take an individual function inside of a business and you're trying to figure out what people do such that you could then enable them to get a better outcome, which is the analogy to education and the way that you put it, that doesn't really exist today. We can barely get people to speak about what they do. So it's inspiring to hear that you're doing that for students. I think there's massive applicability to the professional world. I will say on the customization or personalization for students, that sounds like it should be driving, and I'm sure it is for Brainly customers or consumers of your products, better outcomes. But if we look at the preparedness of students as they come into the university system right now, we are not seeing.
This is the UC San Diego study, I think, that came out last week.
That's right. So I'm going to bring it up here. I'll bring up a tweet.
Have you seen this, Bill?
Yeah, I did.
This is this is a chart that was generated from that study. But essentially, what it is that students that are entering UC San Diego are requiring remedial math courses down to the middle school level, meaning we are not preparing our younger students, and we're letting in students into university that cannot meet the basic requirements in a core function or a core subject matter.
I think the stat was like it went from 1 in 8 that needed remedial, or 1 in 100 that needed remedial math to 1 in 8, something like that, over a 3-year period, which is crazy. That means we have massive knowledge gaps in the kids in the educational system now, like going through K through 12, plus now entering the university system. From my perspective, like, this is a huge opportunity though to close those gaps, and it has to be a scalable solution, right? When you're talking like that many kids, like, do we expect them all to go to college and pay for remedial math? Because you still have a bunch of kids running around society who can't do basic, things. So I think, like, this is a massive opportunity for EdTech in the sense of, like, bridging knowledge gaps. But
Yeah.
that personalization could be really important here,
Yeah, and let me give you guys some perspective here. Like, this stuff that we're talking about right now, this is the easy stuff, because these are students who have opted to go to college, right? They're already committed and invested in their education. If it's intrinsic, extrinsic, like, it doesn't matter, right? They've made a choice, they've gotten that far, and they're motivated to do something with education. So those are the easier, that's the easy part of the market to solve for. Pull back. Look at how many adults, how many US citizens today can't read or write above a 6th grade level. This is a much, much bigger problem than the kids who need help in math going into university. We're talking about students who drop out of school before they hit high school. We're talking about kids who've been pushed through school who again can't read or write above a 6th grade level, but they've graduated high school. Like, this is a huge problem for the United States. Like, our level of education, the general level of education for the average US citizen, is far below what we see here with these university students who are struggling and below standard. Now, all of them need to be addressed, right? This isn't about cherry picking and saying, like, one problem is worse than another, but it is to say that our current education system hasn't been working for most people for a very long time. And the trend that we're seeing towards worsening results is it's a timely problem in the sense that COVID had a huge impact on things. And it's also the predictable continuation of a system that's failing and failing more people. Like, we've seen these trends going up. It's not like we saw these things flatline and it was like, well, it's only ever going to be 20%. It was always trending up. Add on top of that everything we talked about at the beginning, right? The fact that if you believe what I believe, which is it's inevitable that there's going to be new job skills that require you to be able to work with AI, and that you need to be able to think more rigorously and apply knowledge, not just recall knowledge, that these core skills are going to be part of every employee's life in the near future. Like, we have a whole big set of problems on our hands that requires nothing more than the full wholesale reevaluation of our education system in the United States. Like,
But the challenge, that's super big. I mean, that challenge is political, so it's like, it's not even like we have a functional way to fix it right now, so it's like, we may not fix it at the foundation layer where we need to in the K through 12 school system. So, like, it's almost like, what other lever do we have to pull on besides EdTech and AI, to bridge this gap?
yeah, there has to be political will. There has to be a cultural change. So these problems start with, what do we value as a society, right? And they're big questions. So everybody who's thinking about this needs to understand why we educate. Like, I think everybody takes it for granted that, of course you have to go to school, but this is a political investment. This is a social, societal investment that the US makes to have the US remain competitive globally. It's an investment to say, We want our citizens to be educated so we can have an educated workforce that can compete globally so that we don't degrade our position, right? So a more philanthropic way to look at this is to say, well, we do this so that every US citizen can live to their fullest potential. I think we all know how politicians and politics work well enough that, like, maybe that's not completely true. There is a bit of hey, we need a well-educated workforce. I mean, you can have both sides of this and feel good about it either way. But the bottom line is we invest in it because it matters. And American citizens need to be educated for the US to be prosperous.
Yeah, but how do we actually then drive, like, where does the money or the support go, though? Because if I'd love to talk about cause and effect here, like, what were the failings that have driven poor outcomes over the last, whatever, 20, 30, 40 years, 50 years? And what are we changing to actually make it better? Like, we can have the political mission, but then what are the actual steps we're going to take to improve it? It sounds like training and education around AI is one. Um, but what other remedies do we need?
So we have the political investment, at least structurally and from a framework perspective. Like, we have the framework by which we say that we care about education, but then look at how we funded it over time. And funded it, I mean the politicians that we've elected and what they've run on. They aren't all pushing towards putting more money into education. And the reason why they're not doing that is because that doesn't get them elected. And it doesn't get them elected because as a society, culturally, we don't care that much about education. We say we do, but if we're not willing to pay more taxes for it, we're not willing to elect politicians who are promoting those ideas, who are pushing those ideas to the front of their political ticket, like, we're not going to get those outcomes. So put all of that aside, and let's say that all of a sudden all of that changes and we're willing to put as much money into this as it takes. We need a wholesale reevaluation. We need to build systems and technologies that require the use of AI in school so that students are leveraging AI as a tool, like they might use the calculator, like they might use a laptop, like they might use any other tool in school. It should be a required thing that they use AI to do their schoolwork. And we can build AI in a way that it reinforces those outcomes that we need in the workforce, in the workplace. Like, there was a study, I think it's a little bit dated, but I think Anthropic put this out, where they did a study of students who used AI to write an essay versus students who didn't use AI to write an essay. And I actually wrote about this on my LinkedIn. I wrote a response to it anyway. And their finding was that there was less cognitive load on the students who used AI to write their essay. And like the conclusion, like the implied, summary of this or opinion of this was like, that's a bad thing. And they also noted, oh, by the way, the students who used AI and had less cognitive load actually had higher quality output. So let's think about what that means. AI can write essays that require you to do less work, and they can produce a better outcome than the students who did them by hand. So is essay writing a task human beings should be doing anymore? Or maybe this was at the wrong level. Maybe like students younger should start using AI to write essays so that their cognitive load is higher and they learn what a good essay looks like. And there's all kinds of ways to shift this problem and say writing essays is no longer something that should be important. Now, debatable whether or not that's true, but I think that when people say essay writing is important, what they're saying is there's processes that writing essays help you develop, there's skills that it helps you develop that are important. Now, if we take that statement, the skills that you learn from writing essays 10 years ago, 20 years ago, those skills that we've developed or that we value, how do we use AI to help develop those skills in students today? But saying don't use AI is not the right answer, right? And so there's this like cultural shift that has to happen to say we value education, but also a cultural shift to say we have to require AI because it is here and we can't ignore it. And the more we try to ignore it, the deeper the hole gets for us, in the sense that students will be unprepared for a world where they have to use AI in the workplace.
Well, is this a public sector discussion? I mean, obviously it has to happen in the public sector, but like, teachers are ill-equipped. My perspective would be that teachers are ill-equipped to even understand what's going on with the technology, and the private sector likely needs to take a more heavy-handed approach here, then, wouldn't they? To provide the tooling, provide the insights to then reform the educational processes. Because ultimately, if it's teachers who aren't steeped in this type of technology, how are they going to provide the opinion in an adequate sense and at scale to actually change the way that education is happening?
Yeah. So it's going to be, you're definitely right. So teachers are not in the best position to say that these changes need to happen. I mean, in some sense, like, they have visibility of what's happening on the ground, but it's a restricted view. They can see what's happening on the ground within their view of things. When you lift up, and each level you go up to a little bit higher, you see different problems and more complexity. So yeah, it's a public sector problem in the sense that, like, we need to fund these things. It can be a private sector solution. Like, Brandly is a private sector company, and we think about these things and we help influence policy around education. Specifically, AI and education has been a big topic for us, and we are thinking about and building solutions that help create this future that we think needs to be created. Um, I think that, like, we'll continue to have private sectors innovating in that space, but there has to be a willingness to adapt and adopt these things that are coming, right? And there might be a little bit of a it's not necessarily the intended outcome, but I think that like, if we look at the private vouchers, and I'm not a huge supporter of private vouchers. Like, there's good parts and there's bad parts to it, and I could talk about both sides equally. But I think one of the things that's going to happen with the voucher system meaning, like, we're going to give families money that would have gone to a public school in the form of a voucher. They'll give it to a family, and that family can now use it to pay for private school tuition for their child instead of sending them to public school. Right. So we're taking monies from public schools, which has all kinds of problems, and the communities that rely upon those will suffer, and we're potentially pushing it into private schools. But what we're also doing is creating an incentive system for those private schools to adopt and adapt these new technologies, because if families value these things and private schools are able to provide them, that money will move. And so this large political system, which is bogged down by bureaucracy, that is the public school system, will not be able to move as quickly as the private school system, and that money will migrate over to private schools. The unfortunate part of this, like I said, is, like, it's going to gut the communities that rely on those public schools, and it's going to create a larger disparity, a larger gap between the haves and the have-nots, the can-dos and the can't-dos. The well-educated and the poorly educated will grow. That gap will grow. Now, that's not a great outcome, right? And I think that we need to address that before it gets too big. But I think the private voucher system, or the school voucher system, will be one of the things that private ed tech benefits from, in the sense that, like, we can sell to private schools more readily and more easily. They'll have more money for it, and they'll be more motivated to do it.
Yeah, I mean, but tying it back to that comment you made earlier about, like, people aren't willing to fund additional, fund education more, vote for politicians to fund it more. I'm not willing to do that, because we've been funding education at obscene levels for decades, and we have countries that fund at a fraction of what we do per student, have way better outcomes in terms of what we can measure through, standardized testing, et cetera. But I think that's a signal that part of the problem isn't just, like, how do we fund the initiative and pay for it? It's like, what are we doing with the money, and what are we teaching at the end of the day? And to make it real, like, back to your earlier point about, like, do we want students writing essays if that's no longer a valuable skill? Like, I think yes, in the sense that I want to continue to develop the skills that essays reinforce, to your point about, like, if it helps reasoning, critical thinking, if it helps structure and systemization, if it helps narrative construction and flow, which is also important for speaking, right? So, like, narrative flow and construction, if you write a lot, also that can help you when you're thinking on your feet, talking to a coworker or a group of people. It can help you formulate a way to tell a complex thing, break it down, and make it digestible to the audience. So I think there's, like, benefits there that if you were to abstract them and put it into an edtech platform, you might get stronger and teach those skills better than just through writing essays. Especially if the kids don't want to spend all this time just writing the essay, but you're reinforcing the same learning behaviors, and edtech can unlock that for sure. I think the challenge is more around, I mean, you're pointing to a private market solution where you could make that transition happen faster. I have a simpler one. Just actually federally ban all civil service worker unions and end that shit tomorrow, because that's really what's clogging up the works here and preventing us from reforming these things. So that's my solution to the problem. And then we could, make sure our inner city schools and our other schools in our communities actually function properly. And we don't have the transfer of money.
Yeah, I mean, you have layers, right? Like, I get where you're coming from. There's layers. So, like, going back to the essay writing, you've got teachers who have been teaching essay writing for decades, right? And they don't necessarily understand what it is we're talking about when we're saying we could put this in an EdTech platform and we could use AI to enable those same skills. They are not necessarily thinking about it because they don't know what's possible. They're not comfortable with that technology. They're not comfortable with those solutions. And education has been burned on technology for a long time. Like, there was a lot of marketing terminology thrown around, and EdTech in terms of adaptive learning and all this advanced technology that would, AI based, that would revolutionize education. Like, that stuff's been thrown out there since the 90s. And it's never delivered, and it's always disempowered or removed agency from the teacher. And I think that's an important thing to recognize. Like, historically, teachers have been burned by these superficial technology implementations in their classroom that have basically taken their ability to teach away from them. So we have to recognize that and address those issues with those teachers, accepting that not all teachers will hear that message because some of them just will never flip or turn that corner. Um, but it needs to get done at the same time, right? So we have all these layers of resistance and layers of understanding of the problems that we're facing. And it's really hard to get everybody, even the people who want to do it, to get everybody on the same page about how to do it or what it is we're doing. Because I think there's momentum building towards we want to change this and fix it, but there's not an agreement on how to fix it or even what's in agreement about what's possible. So it's tough, right? And it's like, I know you guys face these problems as well, like working in an enterprise. I'm, trying to do change management in an enterprise or
No.
implement systems.
I mean,
It's crazy.
we
It,
even one of our core models inside of our center of excellence approach, where you are creating a team that is meant purely for innovation and transformation, is training and enablement of a workforce. Because you can keep building the greatest stuff in the world, but if you can't actually educate the recipients of that capability to not just adopt the tech, but then change how they think about a problem, how they might apply the technology or extend what you're giving them, you've lost you've lost from the starting gun. It has to be a core pillar of how you get this stuff done. Now, in education and teachers and unions, I don't know that world. I don't know if that's even reasonably possible if you have that level of bureaucracy and barrier in front of you when you're trying to drive that change. I think the forcing function, like you mentioned, is the change in how the flow of cash gets to either public or private or the voucher system. I think that's the forcing function. Now, the ramifications of that, the way you put it, Bill, sound terrible, but either change or don't. It kind of feels like the options here, and I think it sounds inevitable with our current political system.
There's also like the families that care about education can opt into platforms like Brainly or other platforms that help shore up the gaps. And that'll be like, I think those people will have an outsized impact. They'll win more. They'll have better outcomes in the future. They'll get better jobs. They'll get higher pay. It's almost like what part of the solution might be like, how do you get kids and families excited about education again? And like I've heard in China, like TikTok is like they have TikTok in China, but it's like the kids scroll through the feed and it's like education stuff and like, but it's addictive and people still use it. Like, is there a consumer app space here where if we just create the killer use case, does the, we get more and more people just funneling into the commercial platforms that can then fill these gaps on site? It does mean more work for the student, right? Like, you're now compounding all the homework they have to do, and their free time would now be like using these apps. But is there some component where the kids can get addicted and get that same kind of dopamine rush they get on TikTok? Something that would actually help them, learn maybe at some point?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely companies working on that problem. So the gamification of education is something that has been talked about for a while, and I know there are quite a few companies working on that. It's a good angle to take in the sense that, like, I think there's going to be a lot of different types of learners who experience a lot of different things with education, and having this sort of broader surface for students and people who want to learn, having this broader surface of options for them to bounce off of, like, some of those things are going to stick, and that means we're going to get more people sticking more often, and that's great. But yeah, China, India, like, if you look at the culture of India, education is important. Kids, students, families, they value education. They don't think of it as a chore. They think of it as a stepping stone to a better life. And this is something that we're missing culturally in the US. I mean, we know this logically, but we don't feel this as meaning like it's a chore. I don't want to go to school. I don't value doing my homework. And until we make that connection, until we're able to get students and their families to care about school and care about education, like, we're going to still have that barrier. Um, and that's a tough one to cross. I think it's like in India, you can drive down the road and see, like, it's a rare, cream of the crop set, but you can see tutors on billboards, right? Like, they're rock stars. In the US, we don't have anything like that. Can you imagine, like, a teacher getting paid as much as, like, even a low end professional athlete? Like, that would be amazing if that became like a standard, or even like the occasional anomaly, right? Like, if it was something that we saw happen, that teaching was valued at that level, and that there could be a ceiling that was raised that high.
Well, you got to get rid of the unions for that to happen, bro. Because you can't, either they're all going to get paid at that level, or none of them are going to get paid at that level. So, like, that's kind of a big problem too. But I would say, like, but like, thinking about that, like, one of the cool, I mean, yes, but like, if we had app experiences that could help drive it, but also connect to the apps themselves outcomes, right? So, like, let's imagine you're rated really high in an educational app and you have these, like, really impressive performances. If I could attach a recruiting pipeline to that, now you might actually get more interest, right? So, like, if there was actually, instead of me going to universities to recruit kids, I built a small university in my company that's going to teach you how to work here over a 4-year period, like an apprenticeship kind of model. If I could plug that into the EdTech platforms where I could trust that you understand these students really well, that your AI learning systems are collecting enough data to understand how they learn, how they think, where their aptitudes might be best applied, and it's a good match for my company. Now, if that were to happen, you get this massive incentive to direct to employment, So maybe that's part of the equation here.
I think it is. Um, I think it is, right? But one thing I just want to go back to is that is almost like the easy part to solve for, because you're talking about students who are participating who care about getting a job. And if you went into the average, ninth grade class today, kids aren't aspiring to be working at, a company who would be hiring from a platform like that. They're aspiring to be influencers and content creators and athletes and musicians. And I mean, those are all awesome, right? Like, I had my dreams when I was young too, and it caused me to not value education because I wanted to chase my dreams to be a professional skateboarder. Now I'm a CTO, right? The world had something else in mind for me, but, like, I am an example of not valuing education and was able to, like, throw it away and somehow still make it. A lot of kids don't get that opportunity, right? So we're looking for, I think we're looking for a more fundamental, lower level solution where kids aren't disincentivized and they can look forward to or look up to being educated and aspire to it, rather than sort of reject it as irrelevant to their lives or the life that they want to live.
Well, sounds like we have some political changes, maybe where capital flows, the private sector maybe being more deeply ingrained, and a cultural shift that we need to make. So just a few small issues. I want to talk about the pushback though. Like, what's the ammunition that the side says, no, we don't need AI here because of XYZ? Or I read this report that says it's actually making our kids dumber, that we're heading towards the Wallyification or the idiocracy of the future by using these tools.
Or they're cheating tools. That's another
Cheating
common
tools.
complaint.
Yeah, all those things, right? It's cheating. There's a sense like, I mean, I literally had this conversation with somebody once at a conference where he was like, well, when I was in school, I had to go to the library and like we had to find the book and find the information. And, he gave me this whole story about how hard it was for him to access information and how much work it was and how much he valued that. And I was like, access to information shouldn't be the barrier to success. Like, this isn't the world we live in anymore. Like the cell phone I have in my pocket can give me access to any information. Learning isn't about getting access to information. Learning is about connecting the information you have access to your mental model and understanding it and building a better mental model. And that's just like a just sort of a misunderstanding. I think that people think that easier access to information is cheating, and that's just not true, right? So there's the whole cheating aspect to it. There's well, my kid's not thinking for themselves aspect to it. We talked a little bit about that with the Anthropic report. But that's a big one. Teachers call that out too, right? Like, they value that the kid can write an essay, and all of a sudden, like, AI can write an essay for the kid. And they're not thinking like, well, maybe essay writing isn't the thing that I value. Maybe it's this other set of skills that essay writing is teaching, and how do I use AI in concert with my goals to produce a better outcome? They're not thinking that way. So every objection has a response. I haven't heard a valid objection yet, other than to say like, okay, great, Bill, I want to use AI in the classroom with my kids. I want to do what you're saying. How do I do that? What are the tools, right? And then I have to say, well, here's the ideas, and you have to bootstrap it all yourself and figure it out. But like, here's the thesis. Here's some rules of thumb. Like, now that you've got like a core understanding, go figure out the nuances and do it yourself, right? And that's just not a scalable solution, and it's not a good answer. So it's one of the things that we're trying to solve for, to say like, teachers shouldn't have to figure that out. We should build tools that just have all of these qualities built into them that teachers can bring into the classroom and use. Homework that adapts to the student, right? So it's like, you can use AI to create these amazing outcomes that aren't even possible without AI. But we can't rely on the teacher to figure that out. And I think once the teachers are on board, the parents will get on board pretty quickly. I think the parents and the teachers are kind of in this stasis. Like, there's mixed support, there's mixed objection. The ones that object will find the other half, like the teachers that object will find the parents that object, and they'll reinforce each other. The ones that are for it will find the other ones that are for it, and they'll reinforce each other. So we're like in this spectrum of support and objection to it, with no real good solution for the ones
Do you think the LMSs could be the bridge here? So like, if the learning management systems that the schools are using had a suite of tools in there that the commercial sector could provide, then and maybe part of that is training in the LMS for the teacher on like how to use these tools and build interesting lesson plans and curriculums. Like, one I've always thought would be interesting is like a prompting lesson where the student just asks a series of questions. That's the curriculum, like, ask this question and probe about this thing and then this thing, and it becomes like more. But if teachers could build those exercises like in a platform, and it's like a point and click banner with all the right training was integrated into the LMS, like, is that the thing that has to unlock this, or do you see another way to bridge it?
The LMSs are a really good integration point for this type of solution, for sure. I mean, if you've got an LMS in your school and in your class, and your teacher's using it and they're requiring the students to use it, it can be the perfect integration point. LMS rollout, or like LMS adoption, isn't as high as we tend to think. a lot of cases where LMSs are deployed, they're deployed superficially. So it's like a Google Docs drive, for example, like for them, and they're just treating it like, here's where you go to download your homework, or you know, it's a web page which has some like very light sort of rules for the classroom type of thing, but like really integrated tools, the kind that we need, the kind that can like audit your interaction with the student's interaction with the AI. And the homework is, all right, you're going to have AI write an essay. Here's the topic, right? And I want you to now interrogate the AI about its factual claims in the essay as if you were the editor of this newspaper article, the editor of this essay, right? So you can set up a scenario where you're like, okay, student, you are going to be a critical thinker. AI is going to do the rote mechanical writing and knowledge recall, but you have to think critically, and I want to see you interrogate AI, and like, here's how we're going to judge, right? And so then in the interrogation, you build in all of these qualities that you talked about, the things we care about with essay writing. So like if you had a tool that did that, and the AI could then score that student's interaction with the AI and produce for the teacher a summative score that the teacher can then agree with and audit and kind of check in themselves, like, great, that's awesome. But I can also tell a teacher to do that, and the teacher has so much work to do now to audit that trail and tell them to like bring it to class. Like, it's doable.
That's a non-starter. Yeah, they're not going to do
It's
that
not
manually.
realistic, right?
Yeah.
But the tool would
Yeah.
work. The tool would work, and that requires
totally
the
agree.
student to be in the tool.
Yeah. It is pointing to like though that it's got to be part of the daily driver that the teacher is using. So that is going to, in the case of an LMS, that's what it's going to be. But I don't believe that LMS manufacturer, like the people who make them, are qualified to actually build those things. I actually think you need specialized companies that do that. So it's kind of this problem of like, well, there need to be the right commercial partnerships in place. The work you're doing, I know Andrew Karpathy is really active in the EdTech sector as well. And like, I think that there's a handful of people in the world that really understand these problems, and we need a distribution mechanism. If maybe the LMS is the Microsoft for, education. In the case of like for us, Microsoft's the main distribution channel for enterprise. But if we start setting up these distribution channels effectively, and you solve it on the teacher side first, giving them really good tools to help them do their job, and you gain traction and adoption, and they become the champions, a lot of these problems go away.
Absolutely. And that's really what it's about. It's about empowering the teachers with better tools, better feedback loops, giving them all the things we take for granted in the enterprise, right? Like access to data, qualitative feedback, analytics, like all these things, and really smart tools to help drive the outcomes that we want. If we're able to give those to teachers, we're empowering them and setting them up for success. And this isn't the ed tech of yesteryear where we just take the job away and we say, well, the technology will teach it better. This isn't that at all.
Well, I mean, where is the capital behind this? Because what do we have? Like 70 million. This number might not be right, but 70 million students in the U.S., millions of teachers in the U.S. Limited disruption. How many LMSs are there? You sound like they're pretty shallow for the most part in their implementation. We certainly have funded bodies around teaching. Is this just a lack of funding in the private sector pushing for this, or?
So, I mean, it can come from both public and private. So I think that there is going to need to be a capital investment by the public sector and a political will to say, we're going to put money behind this and we're going to require this change, and it's going to need to happen on this schedule, right? So setting up the goals and driving the private market to work on those goals is something that, like, as a nation, we should all take very seriously. Like, if we're thinking about, again, education is important for us to be globally competitive, and an educated workforce is the one that helps America stay on top globally. Like, we can't afford to fall behind. We can't afford to not do this. If we're looking 10, 20, 30, 40 years out, there's no calculation here that doesn't make sense, right? Like, put as much money into it as we need to, because we're talking about literally trillions upon trillions upon trillions of dollars of lost productivity if we don't.
And we have the receipts. I mean, we are measuring that we are behind. There's this UC San Diego study, but there's multiple studies. All the stats show behind. So I think it's a priority for the current administration. I think Brainly went to a AI summit at the White House. I think Bork was there talking about this.
Absolutely.
As well.
We got invited to recognize and celebrate the work that we're doing, the commitment we've made to help push America forward in AI within EdTech. So we've made some commitments to the administration that we're delivering on, and we'll continue to do this. And yeah, it's a problem we think about, right? It's a problem that I'm always trying to put in perspective with my day to day to say, okay, what are we working on today? And like, how does this get us closer to fulfilling that mission and delivering on that promise? But we need a lot more people working on it, and it needs to be a larger investment. But you're right. This administration is invested. We need that investment to continue, and we all need to be like taking this seriously in the sense that like who we elect and what we value needs to reflect the importance of this particular moment and how we're going to affect the future.
Bill, what does it look like when we're trying to get AI tooling or AI education in specific cohorts of students? I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on like, what does it look like for pre-K students, for elementary grade students? And if you could talk about maybe some of the positives and negatives that we've talked about more broadly on an education perspective, like down in those cohorts of students.
And just before you answer that, I want the audience to remember Bill has experience in this, right? Like you were at Age of Learning, you worked on ABC Mouse for years, so you have a deep understanding of this topic already.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and before that, I worked with AOL on some EdTech products that were also in the pre middle school range. So yeah, I mean, I think the younger kids, technology is more welcome in the classroom, or has been traditionally, or I should say traditionally is like in air quotes, like in the last, I'd say 10 years, younger students, getting them introduced to technology in a meaningful way has been relatively easy compared to like integrating it in later school years. High school has been difficult, and there's a lot of reasons for that, but getting kids to use a gamified education platform when they're very young isn't as difficult as it might seem if you were only looking at what it's like to work with high schools. Teachers are generally open to that. They're generally welcoming of these types of platforms. Kids love them. Kids love like gamified learning, and that's generally what that type of technology is pointing at. And I think that teachers have not had the same off-putting experience with technology, right? Because I think that the EdTech aimed at targeting those age groups, it never claimed to like let the teacher sit at their desk and ignore the classroom. The software is going to teach your kids. Like, that you can't do that with little kids. And so it never tried to. It was always supplemental. It was always like in addition to whatever the teacher was doing, and the teacher was the coach and the facilitator. So, I mean, really good results there in the last 10 years that I've seen. There's still a lot more that needs to happen. We have these wealth disparities, these obviously if the school can afford it and they have the motivation to do it, it's a lot easier than a school who wants to do it but can't afford it. And a school who wants to do it and can't afford it because they have to buy computers first is very different than a school who has the infrastructure and the computers and is just lacking like funds for that particular program, because then they can get on board in the next year or 2 years from now, like they can sort of build that into their program and their budget. But some of these schools are like, they don't even have the infrastructure for it. They don't have internet access. They don't have computers that are in the classroom or available to students. Some of these classrooms don't even have textbooks, shared textbooks across the students. So there's a huge range of opportunity from almost non-existent to like opportunity and abundance, and so you see adoption happening more at the abundance scale than the other side of the scale.
In the pre-K context, like if we look at the pre-K cohort, and this is good for you, Connor, because you have one child in that cohort already. I think I remember the baby Einstein days when my daughter was really young. We watched baby Einstein to death, head, shoulders, knees, and toes, still stuck in my head. But I'm wondering, like, for the applications of AI in pre-K, like, and she loved the iPad, right? So like the iPad was this massive thing that she would play games on all day, even at a very young age. Does the form factor look like generative video and a combination of like AI interactive gaming, or like what do you think the form factor of pre-K looks like specifically with Gen AI injected?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So I think it would look very similar to what we see mostly today, which is crafted animation, but I think the animation and the lessons will be more dynamic and more adaptive. Like right now, the adaptivity that's built into products is largely scaffolded adaptivity, meaning it's closed loop, or it doesn't have an infinite number of options. It's basically doing an assessment based off of the scaffolded understanding of the curriculum and what the learner is doing correct or incorrect and where they need to go next, right? So, I mean, in code, this would be algorithmic. It might not even be algorithmic. It might just be, a set of preset conditions like a switch statement, right? It's like that's the level of sophistication. Whereas when we start to introduce Gen AI opportunities, we can really open that up and we can start to um, explore non-deterministic outcomes that are better than the deterministic branch logic that we're doing today. That's a hard problem though, a very hard problem, and it requires a lot of research. So anytime you're building a non-deterministic outcome in an educational environment, you have to have really strong signals for what you're going to do next. And that non-deterministic outcome, like you can't necessarily audit that in the same way you would a deterministic branch logic tree. So you have to have really good understanding of the problem space. Um, and you can, like I said, it's difficult to audit it. You can ultimately do end-to-end audits of the trail and be like, was this really the best outcome for the like, but you very rarely can say this was the reason why this happened.
Does it?
You just
I mean, if we can
measure right.
design the system well enough, can't we just have stage gates of testing that then prove that the outcome is better?
Well, typically, so in education, we never trust the developer's evaluation of their own outcomes. So we would the way that we test outcomes in education is third-party independent testing of actual independent outcomes. So for example, if we say that using Brainly is educationally valuable for a student, what we'd want to see is indicators of that student's success in the real world. Not that Brainly itself can say, oh, well, look, the student is performing better in our system. That doesn't really matter. It matters that in the classroom, did they improve or not? And that's very similar problem to what we have here with younger kids and non-deterministic outcomes. We can say, like, did the system do the thing that we think it should have done? We can't necessarily say why did it do that thing. That's a much I mean, sometimes we can, but it's a much harder problem to solve. We can certainly test, I think, to your question, like, we can test parts of the system to say, is the range of outcomes acceptable? Is the observed range of outcomes acceptable? But with non-determinism, like, we don't know if those boundaries are hard or soft and when they'll be violated, if at all. In the same way that, like, today we are pretty sure that ChatGPT won't do something evil, but like the news tells us that it actually does do evil things sometimes. And that thing's been tested to death, right? Like,
Especially under prompt injection. So
yeah,
there's all these new
yeah,
attack surfaces too that have to be accounted for as we roll these things out.
and it's easier with little kids, right? Because they're not necessarily prompting, and you've got very deterministic like conditions in which the AI is operating. But again, like the variability of the outcomes starts to become the limiting factor of your confidence. It's like, of these billions of potential outcomes that should fall within this range, I can test some of them, and I can try to test the boundaries, but you'll never fully know. So it becomes a bit of a scarier problem.
And speaking of variable outcomes, maybe we transition a little bit to just close on the state of the EdTech space generally. We got vastly different outcomes here. Like Chegg has just gotten absolutely obliterated in the public markets. Duolingo has gone ballistic, right? Like the growth trajectory of their platform has been pretty crazy. What do you see in the EdTech space? Like, what do you how are the VCs approaching it in the private space? How are these companies going to turn it around? Because obviously, like, I think the people who created AI fundamentally believe education is one of the best applications of AI. And so, like, why do we have this disconnect in this weird world right now where, like, the ed tech companies can't seem to figure out the killer use cases and get the markets behind it? Maybe you talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's a hard question to answer without being a bit condescending and pissing some people off. I'm never shied away from that. You guys know me. So let's piss some people off. Look, I think EdTech had a huge influx of capital during COVID, and not all of it was justified. A lot of companies sprung up overnight to take advantage of this and were able to get investment. They were able to get VCs convinced that, like, they were the thing to put their money into. Companies that had been around for a while saw their valuations go up dramatically due to conditions that had now appeared, with kids needing these ed tech products, and being schooled from home, and not having their teachers available. And so there was a bit of a bubble there during COVID. There's a bit of a bubble, and a lot of people jumping into the market to try to take advantage of that hype cycle. And then we saw that back off, right? So we saw usage come down after COVID across all of EdTech. And then the 1-2 punch here was, and now comes genAI, and genAI is sort of shifting the value proposition, not just for EdTech, but for a lot of companies. And this is what we continue to see in happening in the market is genAI is taking over more and more market space. It's giving less room for traditional models to survive. And so those players who have had a position and a value proposition now have to rethink what is our value proposition. I'm happy to say that we've recognized this super early at Brainly, and probably because we were already building in this space before ChatGPT came out, before it became known to the general public. I was sitting in a board meeting saying this is going to be like a commodity. Like, this functionality is just going to be everywhere. And we have to rethink what that means. Like, what does that mean to us? And we did. Like, we acted responsibly, and we started shifting our value proposition and reinventing ourselves. And some others didn't. And I think that the market's recognizing that. Now, I think the market's also recognizing that that is a lot of work, and there's a lot of uncertainty, and there is a hype cycle happening around AI first companies, and there's this whole new sort of thing for people to be infatuated with that's sucking money out of EdTech. That's not to say that it wouldn't have left. It's just probably wouldn't have left as fast. And there's some qualities of good companies, good EdTech companies that are leveraging AI that are getting overlooked because they're being compared either to a traditional EdTech company or to an AI company. And people aren't recognizing there's this new market for AI EdTech that doesn't really have comparables yet because it hasn't seen market success. Like, we haven't really been selling and installing these solutions yet. So rightfully so, the VC is kind of like hesitant. But once there's one winner in that space, you're probably going to see more VC looking for other winners. They're going to be like, once there's an example of success, there's going to be an opening of the floodgates, so to speak, which is generally how things happen, right? Like, somebody hits it. Like, when one particular market offering takes off, and then VCs all rush in to find the next one like the last one that's going to also take off, kind of like a copycat syndrome.
Yeah, I just think like at the executive level, maybe we wrap on this just because we're running out of time. Why are there not more leaders that can make the call to adopt something in advance of waiting for all their peers to do it? Because they just naturally get disrupted when that happens. Like, yeah, you're looking for the one winner for these.
Connor's trying to piss more people off, so
Yeah.
just let him run.
God, if you hold a C-level executive position in a large institution and you have to wait for your competitors to make the call in adopting what is obviously the biggest technological revolution since the internet, should you hold that position in your company?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one. Like I do I have a lot of these conversations with C-level executives outside of Brandly. Just being in the position that I am, I get asked quite a few questions, and I have a decent network of colleagues that I always welcome them to call upon me if I can be helpful. So I get to see a lot, and that's why I do that. Like, I get to see a lot, and I get to understand a lot of different thinking. And there's a sense of like, the more successful we are, the more resistant there is to change, because like what we did worked. So do we want to throw that away and like build a new secret sauce? Or can we just see this through, and this is just a temporary market trend or a market glitch, or like maybe it won't impact us, or like we won't feel that, or there's not enough that we know about for sure to really make that call and disrupt a business that's doing hundreds of millions, if not more, in annual revenue. Those are all considerations for sure. And I think that sitting in the seat that I've sat in traditionally, where I've been working on leading edge technologies and able to see as many trends as I've seen, I can make calls very clearly and state things very clearly and be like, this is going to happen, right? But then at the end of the day, it's not my call. And that not my call part allows me to make those statements more confidently, because I don't have the emotional baggage of like, what if I get this wrong? I'm always like, there's somebody else who's going to check my work, or at least challenge me on this before the final call is made. So I don't envy those CEOs who are in the seat, right? Because I think that's a hard spot to be in, when it's on you, and those your decision can cause your company to lose or succeed. And to be clear, like, I'm not always right. So thank God there's CEOs to check me, because I've said a lot of stupid shit.
Well, thanks, guys. Today we covered the state of AI in education and its limitations, the importance of education culturally, and how to get back on track in the US, how AI is impacting students at different age levels, and the state of EdTech and how it can be part of the collective solution for students. Bill, thank you so much for your time. Where can people find more about you and Brainly?
I think the best place to find me is on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn, my name's Salak. Find me, Bill Salak, on LinkedIn, and Brandly.com, or Brandly in the App Store if you want to see what we're doing in our product. We've got new releases every month.
Future episodes coming, more and more guests of partners, customers, content creators, Palantir, other tech companies, you name it. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.